You may have heard of this guy. His name is Joseph Smith. And without him, there is no Latter-day Saintism. Latter-day Saintism is the study of all of the Latter-day Saint churches that go back to the origin with Joseph Smith. Now, we have an hour to do this.
Yes.
Which means you're getting the bare skeleton of things. But hopefully I can go through a few things and maybe show you something about Latter-day Saintism you didn't know. And then we'll have some time for questions at the end. In 1830, Joseph Smith with a group of people organized the original church of Latter-day Saintism. And that original church was named the Church of Christ. And in 1838, they were in a different location. They organized the church under the name of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is probably very familiar to you, particularly now that Mitt Romney is running for president. And they changed, a couple reasons they changed the name. I think there were the Campbellites, who were also called the Church of Christ. And there was some confusion. People thought they were Campbellites. The other reason they changed the name is they were trying to get away from another name. And that name was Mormon. Because of the Book of Mormon, people started calling the Church of Christ Mormons. And it was a derogatory way of referring to them. And so they were trying to get away from that. Very unsuccessfully, but they tried. They had been referring to themselves as Latter-day Saints in their publications for about 4 years before this change. And so finally we get to the official change in 38. In 1844, Joseph and his brother Hiram Smith were killed in the Carthage jail. And we'll tell you the story about why that happened. But 1830 to 1844, that's 14 years. This was a young man. There are historians outside of the Latter-day Saint movement. Some are Christians in other denominations. Some aren't Christians, who study this man and what he started. Because it is such a unique American story, and it did something, it helped shape what America became in ways that I didn't understand until I went to college and someone explained it to me. So, 14 years. And he caused a lot of trouble in those 14 years. Some people love Joseph Smith, some people hate Joseph Smith. Some people think Joseph Smith was a good guy. Some people think he was a bad guy. Some people think he was a prophet, and some people think he was a con artist. And whatever you view of Joseph Smith, you can get on a computer and with some pointing and clicking, within seconds come up with people who think pretty much like you do, because they're all over the place. Nauvoo, Illinois, right there. Okay, I failed geography. Not literally got an F, but I should have, So these are just general areas here. In 1844, after Joseph Smith was killed, Carthage jail is just north of Nauvoo. Something happened a month before Joseph Smith's murder, basically is what it was. Lynching, except they used a gun instead of a rope. There was a paper that started up in Nauvoo called the Nauvoo Expositor. A little background on Nauvoo. Before 1840, the church wasn't there. 4 years later, after digging out a swamp with mosquitoes, malaria-infested mosquitoes, it rivaled Chicago in population. in 4 years. Imagine that. It was 10,000 people living there. That doesn't sound like much. But in 1830, on the border to the wilderness, basically, that was substantial. Like I said, it rivaled Chicago. Dominated the politics in that part of the state and was threatening to dominate the state politics. People don't like it when you dominate their politics at all. So, the Nauvoo Expositor was this paper that people who were dissatisfied with the church got a printing press and got a storefront and started printing. They printed one edition because after they printed it, their printing press was destroyed because people didn't like what they said. And here's what they said. They said that there were secret practices going on in the church by a small group of leaders and a few other people. And these practices had to do with things like polygamy. I'm trying to just go through the list here a little bit with you. The Adam God theory. There was blood atonement. Adam God theory basically says as God is, man will be, as man is, God used to be. That we will ultimately become like God. Blood atonement is if you catch someone in their sin, you can kill them, and the blood they shed will cleanse the sin, and they can be saved. They can go to heaven. It's kind of the opposite of what you have in Hamlet. Hamlet wanted to catch his father-in-law, or his stepfather, in the act of sinning with his mother to send him to hell. So this is like the opposite of that. So there were some other things, but those are kind of the big. Oh, celestial marriage. You're married for eternity. So with the divorce rates we have nowadays, that probably wouldn't be a popular idea for a lot of people. So the militia in Nauvoo, some people from the militia came and destroyed the printing press. The political powers in the state didn't like this. Back on the prairie, no matter how many westerns you've seen where people come in and destroy the printing press, the press was sacred in a way. You didn't destroy printing presses unless you wanted to get in a lot of trouble. And he did. So he went to Carthage voluntarily a month later because there was going to be violence if he didn't do it. And they put him in jail to wait for his trial. The mob came and he was shot and killed. These were within 5 years, there were 5 main groups. These are just some of those. Over here, sorry about that. Over here you have the Rocky Mountain Basin. And over here you have the Midwest Plains. I'm going to give you a very general thing about this. After Joseph Smith's death, the people who went west over here continued to believe and develop those beliefs the Nauvoo Expositor had said was going on secretly in the church. The people who stayed in the Midwest Basin here, they rejected all that. Understand, a month before Joseph Smith's death, none of this was part of the church. No one would even know it was going on except for those secret societies within the church. It had not been for the Nauvoo Expositor. So, when you look at these different groups, it's hard, it gets confusing. when you talk about Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We're organized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The true Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So, they make it simple. People who follow Brigham Young are called Brighamites. Are called Brighamites.
Clip it on your pocket.
I've never clipped one before.
There you go.
Okay. Are called Brighamites. People who follow this guy, Alpheus Cutler, are called Cutlerites. The people who call Sidney Reading are Rigdonites. James Strang are Strangites. I don't know who makes the rule as to whether you use the first name or the last name here, but someone figured it out. I forgot to put a group on here, and it's in Independence, Missouri, around in here, and they're called the Josephites. And ultimately, the son of Joseph Smith Jr. came to lead them, okay? Now, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Brighamites, the guys in Utah, they are 14 million strong. They are by far the most successful. They make up 98% of all the Latter-day Saints in the world, okay? And, you know, they went with the polygamy and the blood atonement and the celestial marriage and the temple rights and those kinds of things that the Nauvoo expositor was talking about. The Community of Christ is the second largest. Now, you can see the disparity here. I mean, there's David and Goliath, and then there's the ant and the dinosaur. And so this is kind of that. 250,000 people in Missouri. This was Joseph Smith III, the Josephites. They didn't buy all that stuff that was going on secretly that the Nauvoo expositor said. You got Bickertonites at 12,000, and you got another one there at 12,000, another one at 10,000, and another one at 10,000. After that, you get people with a few hundred members. Most are one or two congregations. But there's 400 of them now. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Community of Christ, which is the part I belong to. And this all comes from Wikipedia. We're called restorationists. All Latter-day Saints are called restorationists. A lot of different reasons why this is. If you think about the Reformation movement that rebelled against the Catholic Church, that brought about Protestantism, they were rebelling against what they believed was a perversion of what Christianity was supposed to be. And they went to the Bible, now that they had it in print, to figure out what that was. That's restorationist, okay? That's informal restorationists. Latter-day Saints were formal restorationists, and we're saying that God is involved in a restoration of things as they were. It may not be organizationally exactly the same, but it's the spirit of it that's important here. We used to be called the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We changed that a little over 10 years ago because, people just thought we were the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So we changed to the Community of Christ. We're Trinitarian Christians. You take Protestant beliefs and our beliefs, and other than the Book of Mormon and the funny stuff about heaven that nobody seems to really understand, we're Protestants. We're Christians. We are Bible-centric, Jesus Christ Christians. Christ, right there. Before we changed the name, we used to say Jesus is our middle name, because he's right there in the middle. Like I said, there's about 250,000. We have 2 temples now. We used to just have one, but then we built another one. This is called the Kirtland Temple. It was built in 1830 by Joseph Smith. At the time, this was cutting-edge architecture. And it's kind of beautiful if you like square buildings like that, and they really did back then. And After Joseph Smith died, and a lot of people went west, a lot of people stayed in the Midwest, but none of the church members stayed in Kirtland, really, or very few. And when the church grew to a point where it could get back to the temple, there were literally sheep herding around and in the, they had to do quite the restoration to get it back in shape. No secret acts in these temples. Anyone can come in, you're invited. There's no special washings or anything like that. Now, this is the new one. It was finished in 1994. It's not, a square box, obviously. The stainless steel that lines the spiral going up, no two pieces are the same size. They're not sure this could have been built before computers, Now, the next picture is fuzzy, and I apologize, but I couldn't find a better one on the notice I had since I'm pinch hitting. So I just wanted to show you this. Oh, by the way, this is in Independence, Missouri, and shortly after it was finished, there's a light at the top of the spire at night, and Kansas City Airport made this its new landmark for the planes coming in from the east. So I don't know if it's a claim to fame or anything, but it's just a little fact there. When people come to the temple, this is the parking lot here, and they go in on the other side of the temple. And again, this temple was dedicated to the pursuit of peace in the world. Why? Because Jesus Christ is the Prince of Peace. And when you go, this part over here is a walkway into the sanctuary. And services are held there. The administrative offices of the church are over here. But you have this experience of worship. You don't just get up and walk out the doors you came in. And the reason why is because the building's a temple. The experience of the building is supposed to inform you, not just the words and the hymns and all that that's spoken inside. The very architecture needs to inform you about something. So when you leave, you have to come out. You have to come out these doors right here. Now, number one, you got to walk around the whole building to get back to your car. So you're going to pay attention to what's going on. This area right here, this patio, it's cobble brick stone. And I don't know if you can tell it, but the lighter stone is an inlay of the map of the whole world. Jesus said, I'm sending you into the whole world. And our church wants us to know that that's what we are. We're not just about sitting around and feeling good in worship services. There are people in the world who need us. We have the Bible, the Book of Mormon, and the Doctrine and Covenants. Joseph Smith worked on the Bible. It's called the inspired version of the Bible. To put it mildly, it's an ahistorical work, because historians didn't know a whole lot about ancient culture and customs. And only in the last 50 years has ancient Hebrew really been understood on a really deep level. So we have that Bible. In our worship services, the guides we get recommend using the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, or an equivalent, because scholarly, it's the best we have. So we don't worship the Bible or anything, just because Joseph Smith, did some things to it. There are parts of that Bible I just love. See, I grew up in a Latter-day Saint home. And I would go to the Bible. Sometimes, like by the time I got to high school and early college, I go to my Bible, and there were parts that if I read them while I was doing really bad and I needed to feel close to Jesus or to God, I would go to those parts. Well, as a young man, I knew we had a different Bible than everybody else. I just didn't know the particulars of it. By the time I got to college, what I had learned was every part in my Bible that I went to read was a part written by Joseph Smith. Without even knowing the difference, his writing, I just gravitated to it. There was a spirit in it that just captured me. The Book of Mormon, number one, nothing is uncontroversial about the Latter-day Saint movement, and nothing is simple either. A lot of people don't believe me when I say this, but in the Book of Mormon, there are good people and bad people. And the good people are the people who follow God's tenets. The bad people are the people who don't. There comes a point in the story in the Book of Mormon where the good people start practicing polygamy. But the bad people don't. They still just marry one person. And the Book of Mormon says that the good people will not endure, even though they're following the law, because of the practice of marrying more than one wife. And when I tell people that's in the Book of Mormon, and they're like, that's impossible. I'm like, really it is. Everything the church has that Joseph Smith wrote before a month, before he died, says polygamy bad, one wife, one husband. That's it. No concubines either. Those are off the table. So a lot of people just don't believe that. I'm not telling you Joseph Smith didn't have anything to do with polygamy. I think he did. But it's not what people think. And the Doctrine and Covenants. Doctrine and Covenants, we believe we have a prophet that leads our church. He's the prophet and president of our church. And we have a world conference every 2 years. It's going to be every 3 years from now, because it's just getting too much for every 2 years. And not all of those world conferences, but most of them, there's a document presented by the prophet of the church, the president and prophet of the church, and that becomes scripture for us if we accept it. We have to vote on it. People have said, why do you vote on it if he's a prophet? And we're like, yeah, but he's human. And our scriptures tell us that as long as the majority of the people remain faithful, that we'll know, the Spirit will lead us in what's true. So the only thing we have to check the power of a prophet who's telling us this is God's will for you is whether the Holy Spirit leads us in accepting it or not. It's not a perfect system because we're all human, but it's the one we've got. Wait. There was something else. Let me tell you a story. Joseph Smith is an interesting character. He had a certain charisma about him. There's a story of, and this happened more than once, it didn't happen all the time. People coming to Kirtland on their way west, and they would be they would meet people and be taken to some of the leaders of the church. Joseph Smith may be around and they'd be introduced to him. There are people who showed up in the early mornings, had such an experience with Joseph Smith and what they felt was something God was really involved with here. They were baptized that afternoon. The next morning, the man may be ordained. They get in their wagon with a copy of the Book of Mormon and keep heading west. Now he's a missionary for the church. Now, like I said, that didn't happen with everybody. But there was this charisma, there was this movement going on that people just felt was really neat, that God is involved in this. Now, there was a lot of people who felt otherwise, also. This is from section 2 of our Doctrine and Covenants. This is Joseph Smith Jr. wrote this. Behold, a marvelous work is about to come forth among the children of men. Now, section 6. A great and marvelous work is about to come unto the children of men. Chapter 10. A great and marvelous work is about to come forth among the children of men. Chapter 12. Behold, a great and marvelous work is about to come forth among the children of men. That's the last time I'm going to do it to you, don't worry. I could do this many, many, many more times. It's repeated over and over in our Doctrine and Covenants. Joseph Smith believed that God wanted a preparatory work on the earth so that people could be prepared and know that what people call the second coming of Christ is not too far off. And there are documents in the Doctrine and Covenants that talk about a time of great upheaval on the earth when, prior to Christ coming in his glory. But before that happens, the remnant will be gathered. The Jews will come back to Jerusalem. And so these were things Joseph Smith thought were in the near future. He also talked about, but before the wars going on in the world, they're going to happen here in our land. And this was about 20 years before the Civil War. This is Doctrine and Covenants 164. This is the last document we got as a church. Stephen M. Beasy is our prophet and president right now. Let me tell you what I'm going to try to do here. This is the last inspired document from our point of view that we got. I'm going to read through some of this and link it back to Joseph Smith, because there is a connectedness that has never left the church. Okay? Beloved children of the restoration, your continuing faith adventure with God has been divinely led. We really believe we're in a faith adventure with God. And divinely led, eventful, challenging, and sometimes surprising to you. It's been all of that, both corporately and for everybody individually. Now, we don't see ourselves as a church as being unique in this respect. All Christians, all people of faith throughout the world are on the same kind of journey with God. Okay? What Joseph believed was there were some things God wanted to happen to make preparation, and that this movement would have a unique kind of covenant, which basically is in the terminology of John the Baptist. So, to lift a clarion call and say, hey, it's time now. We need to pay attention. We need to be looking forward for Christ's coming in glory. When your willingness to live in sacred community as Christ's new creation. Joseph Smith went from place to place to place trying to build the kingdom of God on earth. City after city after city. Church went to Independence, Missouri. The governor of Independence put out an extermination order on the saints. We're called Latter-day Saints. That's not saints as in St. Paul or St. Peter or, St. Joan of Arc or however you want, those guys. That saint is in, Paul writing a letter to the saints of whatever city. It just means people following Jesus. Sacred community as Christ's new creation exceeds your natural fear of spiritual and relational transformation. You will become who you are called to be. We believe in this calling. All of the Latter-day Saint churches do. The church I go to is headquartered in Independence, Missouri. The church the Brighamites are out there in Salt Lake City, Utah, is their headquarters. And as far away as we are from each other geographically, we're about as far from each other theologically too. There's a lot of difference in theology. But this same sense is in all of the churches. Regardless of where they went theologically, they believe that they're a part of something unique with God to prepare for the second coming of Jesus Christ. The rise of Zion, the beautiful. This isn't Zion as in Zionism is racism kind of thing, with like the Jews. But it is in Zion as the peaceable kingdom of God. The peaceable reign of Christ awaits your wholehearted response to the call to make and steadfastly hold to God's covenant of peace in Jesus Christ. I don't think there's a document in our Doctrine and Covenants, and there's 164 of them, that doesn't call our fidelity to Jesus Christ. This covenant entails sacramental living that respects and reveals God's presence and reconciling activity in creation. It requires whole life stewardship dedicated to expanding the church's restoring ministries. And this is big, especially those devoted to asserting the worth of persons, protecting the sacredness of creation, and relieving physical and spiritual suffering. Latter-day Saint churches are big on having hospitals. A lot of people in my congregation in Pensacola went into special education. I mean, these kinds of callings are ingrained in the fabric of who we are. If you truly would be community of Christ, and we don't call our church the community of Christ, like the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, we believe there's a community of Christ. And everybody's going to be a part of that. I mean, it doesn't matter who you are. The divisions that we all live with now in worshiping Christ and worshiping God, whether within Christianity or between the world religions, we believe eventually, as Paul says in the 15th chapter of Corinthians, all the kingdoms will be brought together. So we're a part of the community of Christ. Then embody and live the concerns and passion of Christ. We follow in Christ's footsteps. The challenges and opportunities are momentous. Will you remain hesitant in the shadows of your fears, insecurities, and competing loyalties? Generally speaking, that's a yes. We all struggle with this. It's hard stuff to be Christ in the world, to be the presence of divinity wherever you are. But that's what we're called to do. Or will you move forward in the light of your divinely instilled call and vision? The mission of Jesus Christ is what matters most for the journey ahead. This was Joseph Smith. The spirit in these words are what he was trying to live. He was very unsuccessful in a lot of ways. He was very human. If you go back and read about Abraham, about half the time God told Abraham to do something, Abraham went and did something else. Usually just the exact opposite. Human beings don't make perfect people. So, there are so many things we could talk about. Let me ask you if you have any questions about what I've said so far. Yes, ma'am.
What does the term Latter-day Saints mean?
Okay, Latter-day Saint means that, the New Testament folks, Christians, call each other saints. The way we call each other Christians today. So, Paul was writing before there was a Christian church. The people following Jesus were just Jews who followed Jesus, right? So, as part of this idea of restoration, let's call ourselves, what the New Testament Christians call. My church tried it for a few years and we didn't like it very much. So we kind of dropped it. I mean, we still use it in conversation sometimes, but we don't call each other saints. It's not culturally conducive, really, particularly with people who aren't part of our tradition. But the latter days are to denote that we're in the times, we're in Book of Revelation times, in essence. And that the return of Jesus is soon. When the Jews came back to Jerusalem, that was like this clarion call. It's time to be looking for this. And so Jesus talked about, the age to come. And Latter-day Saints are saying we're getting close to the time when Jesus is going to come and usher in that new age, which is called the millennium. Latter-day Saints believe in the millennium. They believe a lot of different things about it. My church is a non-creedal church. We don't have a creed. We have basic beliefs, but you don't have to believe them. As long as you believe in Jesus, Jesus was the Son of God, and you want to be baptized in our church, you're welcome to. Now, we'll talk to you about some of the other things we think is a basic belief you ought to believe, but, that's up to you. Anyway, yes, go ahead.
Y'all don't use the Nicene Creed as part of your service?
Sure.
Oh, okay. You said you didn't have a creed.
Okay. We don't have a creed that, as a rule, members have to follow if they want to be a member of our church. If they want to be baptized into our church. Okay? For instance, if you don't believe that Jesus was born of a virgin, we'll still baptize you. Okay? We might talk to you about why do you believe that or why don't you believe that. But that's not, if you believe Jesus is divinity, the Son of God, and sometimes I think we use Son of God too much and we should use God incarnate more. Because there is a subtle difference there. So if you believe Jesus is God incarnate, if we don't agree on all the details about how he got to be God incarnate, we don't have a creedal statement that says, okay, that's a deal breaker here. Okay? So
we don't have anything like the Nicene Creed?
We have basic beliefs. You can go to seaofchrist.org and there's the basic beliefs. Let me make it easier for you. Go to Wikipedia. You can go to Mormonism. You can go to Latter-day Saints. It'll take you to some kind of a main terminal, and you can click on communityofchrist.org. You can click on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and there are others.
Or is each church sort of independent, or is there a hierarchy?
Okay, when you say church, are you talking about the different Latter-day Saint congregations? Okay, there's a hierarchy. Okay, so it's interesting to have a hierarchy in a church that doesn't have a creed.
Yes.
So when I say hierarchy, we're talking an institutional hierarchy. So each congregation has a pastor. There's some organizational structure around which you are. We call them mission centers now. There will be a mission center president. Usually they report to an apostle in the church. And I didn't get this on a slide. All the churches are basically structured the same. It's not universal, but basically we have the president and prophet of the church, and he has 2 counselors. And they make up what we call the leading quorum of the church. Now, then there's the quorum of the 12 apostles. And there's 12 of them. And they make up the second leading quorum of the church. And then there's the bishopric, the money guys. And there's a bishop and 2 counselors. And they are in charge of, the financial and physical concerns of the church. Well, let me tell you this story because it's kind of funny. In the early church, when Joseph, every once in a while, someone else would come into the church, come into the leadership of the church that was on par in terms of strong personality, intellect, charisma with Joseph. And either they reconciled and learned to work together with Joseph still being in charge, or they left, or they hung around and were disgruntled. Okay. By the time you get to Nauvoo, Brigham Young is the president of the Council of 12. Very powerful position in the church. It's not as powerful as the first presidency, but he's right next to that. So, he's got charisma. He's intelligent. People were drawn to him. So what does Joseph do? He sends him to England. He gets him out of there. He says, you go to England and convert people. So he goes to England. Should I not be walking around? I'm sorry. Okay, so he goes to England. This is what the church did back then. If you're in 1830, if you were living in England and you were poor, and you just wished you could go to America where all these wonderful stories are coming back of people going out there with all that land and everything, but you know you'll never make it. And then you hear, hey, there's this guy in town. And if you go down to his church and you join his church, free passage to America. They would charter a whole ship. You know, if you didn't even believe a thing he said, and you wanted your children to grow up in a better place, you know, either you'd find a way to believe it or you just lie about it. Yeah, this is your family that's at stake. You want a better place. It was a very smart thing to do. All those people were converted by Brigham Young in England.
Did they stay converted once they got here?
Yeah, and they went to Nauvoo, all of them. So, when Joseph Smith was killed, over 80% of the city of Nauvoo came from England and saw Brigham Young as the one who ushered them into the church. So when there's a crisis of leadership, who are you going to believe? The person who brought you into this new relationship with Jesus, into this new dynamic life. It didn't matter what everybody else said. Almost everybody in Nauvoo went west with Brigham. Now, one of the things in Wikipedia it says is the majority of the church went west with Brigham. It's just not true. The number of people who went west with Brigham were about 1/5 to 1/10 of the total church. Most of the people in church didn't live in Nauvoo. It was just the center, and it's where they brought all those English people. So, now, they've more than made up for it since, and so I'm not, gainsaying them at all. There's this unique relationship between the churches, and we kind of call each other distant cousins. We don't want to claim each other by any stretch of the imagination, but we understand the relationship is there, and we make the best of it. So, but anyway, any more questions?
So all of the churches, I'm sorry, I didn't even know.
No, that's right.
So all of the churches used, all of the different Brighamites and Smithites and all those people, you use the same Book of Mormon?
Generally speaking, yes. What happened is, basically my church owns the rights to the original Book of Mormon, that was first published in 1830. So basically the Mormon church can't publish that. Now, we don't stop them from trying to publish the Book of Mormon, but what they've done is, let's just say there has been a different way of, paragraphing it out, chaptering it out. Some of the wording that was modernized will be different in the two books. The general story is the same. So, I mean, I'm not saying, they took all these great parts out or anything like that. But sometimes I'll go look up something in the Book of Mormon, and I'll go online and I'll be in a Mormon Book of Mormon instead of our church's Book of Mormon, and I go to chapter and verse and I'm lost because it's just not the same. So, but yeah. Anybody? Yes.
Do Mormons serve in the military?
As far as I know, they do. Yeah. Now, I understand anything I say about the Utah Mormon Church. If you're not a Utah Mormon, and I say Utah Mormon because that's the headquarters. That's right. If you're not a Brighamite, you know as much about the Mormon Church as I do. I mean, know a little more because we're distant cousins. But as far as I know, there's nothing in the Mormon Church against serving in the military. They're against war. But Joseph Smith put in the Doctrine and Covenants a document that says we are to follow the laws of the land where we live. And part of the laws of the land is, particularly if you get called up for service, you go. Also, Mormons can be very patriotic people, and I'm sure volunteer for service. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, I was wondering about the young missionaries that you see out and about.
Mm-hmm.
Are they is that a process in a certain level of membership in the church, and when was that instilled in the church?
Okay, they're Brighamites.
Oh.
They're from the church in Salt Lake City, and this is my understanding. You've grown up as a young man in the Mormon. They are the Mormons. They have come to embrace that name. They would prefer to be called Latter-day Saints, but they're good with Mormons. If you call me a Mormon, I kind of bristle a little bit because I don't really consider myself a Mormon. But it's okay. I mean, I'm not. I don't make a big deal out of it because I understand. When you grow in my church, we believe we're being led by the Holy Spirit. Okay. So there came a point in my life. My pastor came to me and he said, "I think that God is calling you to the priesthood and wants you to be a priest in the Aaronic priesthood." There are two priesthoods, an Aaronic priesthood and a Melchizedek priesthood. The Aaronic priesthood is named after Aaron, as in Moses and Aaron. The Melchizedek priesthood is after the great high priest, who was the great high priest of Salem, which became Jerusalem, before there were Jews. So, I mean, that's where these names come from. We call the Aaronic priesthood the lower priesthood, and the Melchizedek priesthood the higher priesthood, but then we say there's no hierarchical relationship. It's kind of, words lose their meaning after a while. Aaronic priesthood, priests, teachers, deacons. And mainly we have the ministry of preparing the people to enter God's presence. That's how we say it. When I was ordained a priest, it was right there in the Aaronic priesthood. A priest can preach, teach, expound, exhort, marry, serve communion, those kinds of things. You get to the Melchizedek priesthood, elders and high priest. And then with high priest, there are apostles, we used to call them patriarchs, now they're evangelists. When you start ordaining women, which we did in 86, you can't call them patriarchs anymore. So we went with evangelists. They used to be called patriarch evangelists, so it just dropped. I wanted to call the men patriarch evangelists and the women matriarch evangelists, but I don't get my way a lot of times. Majority rule is just, rough sometimes. So in the Utah church, and you're growing up a young man, and this is my understanding, and when you reach a certain age, you are groomed to come into the priesthood. You're prepared. I shouldn't say groomed, prepared. They take it very seriously. But I think once you reach a certain age, if you're a member in good standing and you've been preparing, you're ordained. Okay. And then I guess when you're 18 years old. Now, I don't know the ages in which the different priesthoods kick in for you at all. Like I said, this is their system, not mine. And I don't know if that is true all the way up through the priesthood, or if at some point it stops being fairly automatic and it's something else. Okay, so you may have to look that up online. But so yeah, that's kind of how it works in their church. Yes.
So the temple in Salt Lake City is not, if it's not a hierarchical, I can't say that word, church, that's not like Rome? It's not where,
Okay. Let's, let me tell you, there's more than one question in there. Let's go with the Rome question first. It's not like Rome. Okay. Pope comes out and says, proclaims. Doesn't happen very often, but when it does, that's it. Okay? And so, it's not like Rome. Now, I have extraordinary respect for Catholics, and some of my most cherished books that I read are from Catholic authors. So, I understand their system is just very different. In Utah, in Salt Lake City, and see, we're getting to a place. Let me talk about my church.
okay?
It sort of works the same way. In my church, Steve VC, usually there's a little paragraph before the actual document that talks about the process he's been going through prior to the conference to bring him to present this to us. So, and let me put this back on the last one because that's really the important one. So, these were presented to the leading quorums of the church. Those three, the presidency, Council of 12, and bishopric before conference. So they've had a chance to look at them. But during conference, all the other quorums, there's a quorum of deacons. Well, there's a mass meeting of priests, teachers, and deacons. They have no power, but they get to get together and talk about it. But then there's mass meetings of all the different elders. There's an elder group. There are 70s. I didn't mention those before. They have their group. There are high priests. They have their group. There are evangelists. They have their group. I think I got it covered now. So, and all these quorums have to talk about this and approve it or not. So, in that process, if they have a problem with something, they request for the private president to come talk to them about it, and that happens. It's a cooperative process. Usually, there have been times when it's almost destroyed the church, but those have been very few. And it's presented to the whole conference then also, obviously. The people who aren't in the priesthood and the quorums of the church. So, however many days we have to review it and all. And then in the church, in all the congregations of the church, in the mission center areas, people vote for representatives. I think it's one for every 10 members. There's no special qualification. You don't have to be in the priesthood to be a delegate to the World Conference. Anybody can put their name up and everybody votes who's a member of the church. If you're 8 years old and you got baptized a week before, you get to vote for who you think ought to represent you at World Conference. So the delegates ultimately sit there and raise their hand as to whether they accept that document or not. If they don't vote for it, it does not become part of the Doctrine and Covenants. It has no binding effect on the church. Okay? It's never happened. It's come really, really close to happening. They have a similar process in Utah. I don't know all the specifics of where it might be the same or different, but it's generally the same. So, yes?
Which branch is the more recent huge temple or tabernacle in Atlanta?
That's the Brighamites.
Okay.
Yeah, we have two temples. We're not going to build any more. It has they have very different places in our in what we do, who we are. what we believe.
Is it your branch or the other branches that give the ring to men at a certain age on a certain occasion?
We don't do that. I don't know. I think that's the Utah Brighamite Church. I could be wrong. I know they do wear the temple underwear. So I think Haynes produces it. And,
Not Ellen?
when I gave tours a summer in Nauvoo, and Nauvoo is right. I mean, the Mississippi River is right there. When you come out every morning in that Mississippi River there, I remember coming out one morning and I'm thinking, now I know why the Indians worship the river. I mean, it's just amazing. And so, we have a few of the properties there. My church got legal ownership of the original church's properties. We would have had a lot more, except the statute of limitations ended on that. That was thrown out of court when the Utah church tried to get control of those properties during a time when basically the United States was at war with the Mormon church. So, it wasn't really fair. We had, everything was stacked in our favor. And because it was thrown out of court, there was no legal decision. But we had, possession and kept that. And like I said, kept copyright on the original Book of Mormon, and we have the inspired version of the Bible also. So, but where was I going with that?
That I'm not sure of. I got interested in what he was.
The underwear, yeah. Oh, when I was in Nauvoo giving tours, we had buildings, and then the rest of the town the Mormon church has, and it's very impressive. They've restored all these buildings, and so there was they have a bus that goes around and picks up all these missionaries who are giving tours, and sometimes we'd be walking around and we get on the bus. They give us a ride and stuff, and it was just a hoot talking about all this stuff with them. They make jokes about it. It's just it's just part of life, and it's kind of neat and funny and serious at all the same time. And we're done, right? Oh.
If I recall, a number of years back, there was a document that was discovered. It was Joseph Smith's.
Oh, yeah.
Joseph Smith's will, and he named his son as his successor.
Joseph Smith III, who,
So this kind of legitimizes the Independence Missouri branch and delegitimate the Utah branch.
except it was a forgery.
It's a forgery, okay.
Yeah, it was a forgery. And here's the thing, guys. Some guy he had discovered another one, and they went back and it was forged. He was good at it. It passed all the cursory tests. All of the Latter-day Saint churches, if you ask them, where does the church start? April 6, 1830 with Joseph Smith. We all have a historical path that goes back to that point. And all of those historical paths are unique and authentic to the people who traveled them. But yeah, there were people in my church going, "Oh yeah, so we were right all along." And then it's you have to eat a little crow when it's forged document. Joseph Smith III would have nothing to do with the church. The branches had organized in the Midwest and were asking him to come when he was a lawyer. He became a lawyer to come, and he had never attended the church or anything. And delegates would go to the house, and he'd sit and he would calmly listen to them, and then wish them a good day, and that was it. And they were having a conference, I think in 62 or 63, and then he walks. I'm sorry, I get a little choked up. He walks up to the pulpit and he says, I come here today of a power that is not my own. And he accepted whatever they would like. They made him the leader of the church. So we believe in that power leading not only our prophet, everybody. The highest office in our church is to be a member in good standing.
When you were talking about, explaining about reading your Bible, I understood you say that it was what Joseph Smith said, or what
Okay.
Bible do you read from?
Okay, my favorite Bible, and I'm an elder in the church, it's the Bible I use when I preach, is the New King James Version.
Okay.
That-
Like you don't do anything to it. I mean, that's just like I could go to the store and buy one, and it's the same
Yes.
Bible you would.
But the inspired version that Joseph did is different. There are some changes. Most of them are stylistic language kinds of things that he thought he was correcting language. And in some ways, in terms of common sense, he was right at times. In terms of Jewish culture 2,000 years ago, not so much. There are other places like Enoch in Genesis. There's a whole section about Enoch in there that isn't in, any of the other Bibles you're going to buy.
In Joseph Smith's Bible, it's about Enoch, and it's not in the Bibles on the bookstores. Is that what you're
Right. Unless you get the inspired version of the Bible, that's what it's called. And there's a lot of argument about how inspired it was, and when you look at it in the face of modern scholarship. So anyway, yeah, there are some sections that are added. Not in the totality, not a whole lot. There's some neat stories though. Yeah.
Would you say that the Brigham Young group is more rigid in their beliefs than, say, some of the other groups? Like,
I might have said that before my church decided to ordain women. And I found out we're more rigid than I thought.
oh, really?
Generally speaking, I think that is the impression. It's the impression I have. It's the impression a lot of people have. There's an argument to be made that the rigidity is a trade-off for many of the benefits that come with that. I don't generally like rigidity, so I'm not sure I would buy the argument. But I mean, if I agreed with that, I would probably be a member of that church instead of this one. Yeah.
One of my neighbors in Atlanta was
LDS, yeah.
Thank you. I keep wanting to say LSD, and I know that.
Yeah.
And she did keep a year's worth of food on hand
Oh, yeah.
at all times.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
pretty much. And there was one other thing. Oh, and is it true, or have I just read this somewhere, that women must be married to enter heaven?
That's the Brighamites again.
Brighamites.
That's celestial marriage. And this goes back to even polygamy.
Yes.
And see, the thought was,
I understand celestial marriage, and that it's not, but that is still a tenet of the Brighamites.
it is a more political correct version. But yes, you're going to be part of the kingdom with your husband, who will end up being like God for the worlds that he will have, and you and the other wives of him will help populate those worlds.
Are women considered then secondary to the men in the Brigham Young?
They would say no.
They would say no.
They would say no, but they don't accept women in the priesthood at this point. If you've known some LDS women, you might agree that there's some LDS women who aren't secondary to anybody. So, it depends on how you're taking it. There was a movie called Beyond Rangoon, and the girl was talking to a Buddhist monk and saying, "Is it true that women can't become monks in Buddhism?" He said, "No." She said, "You're kidding, right? Women can't become monks in Buddhism?" He said, "Sure they can. All they have to do is die and be reborn as a man." So your point, it depends on what point of view you have, how you look at things. But yeah. An interesting thing about my church is we went into Independence, Missouri. We baptized and ordained black folks. And we said, the Indians out there who killed your cousin or your neighbor or your mother are God's children, just like everybody else. And it didn't go over well. We didn't always say it politely, so part of it was our fault too, but those were fighting words, and people thought. Yes.
Do the young people from your church participate in the missionaries like the ones we see?
No, we've never had a program like that. Now, there are missionary programs young people in my church participate in, but it isn't the very impressive and efficient program that the Mormon Church has. No. Yes.
Maybe kind of an unfair question, but what
There's no unfair question.
if there was one book in the Book of Mormon that you would recommend? What would
It's the third Nephi book. It describes a story where Christ comes after a great tumult to the peoples of the Americas and blesses their children. That's the short version. And then we get into the Book of Mormon and things get really crazy. So, yeah. But Joseph could write in such a way that just brings tears to my eyes. He had some extraordinary gifts as well as some extraordinary failures. Yes.
Is genealogy important to your church as it is to the Utah branch?
No. The reason genealogy is important is because of this celestial marriage, this kingdom building through eternity, and also for baptism for the dead, so you can go back, bury your dead relatives. Baptize your dead relatives. They are buried, hopefully. And this is all part of creating an eternal kingdom. Okay? So, I'm sorry, I just don't buy any of it. It's like I said, that was Nauvoo expositor stuff that was never a part of the church that Joseph Smith was part of until the very end. At the very end, he was the private president of the church. He was the mayor of the town. He was the commanding general in the militia. He had a red brick store. He had his farm. He was running for president of the United States. And everything went crazy. I think he just lost it. So it's my personal opinion. And they said he would have been like a Ross Perot. He could have affected the outcome. Had no chance of ever even coming close to winning, but the head Masonic guy in Illinois came to Nauvoo, left 3 days later, and Joseph Smith was a 33rd degree Mason. And back then, the Masonic order and the political leadership in the state and the country, it was like this. Masons don't do that. You don't become a 33rd degree Mason. But Joseph talked to him basically and probably said something like this. I'm the prophet that God is using to restore all right things. And basically, what is there that you can teach me? I'm here to teach you and to help make everything, all the institutions of our world fulfilled the way Jesus wants. Oh, here's your ring. Now, it wasn't long before he was no longer the head Mason in Illinois. So, but, that's the kind of thing, it was very good. I'm sorry, our time ran out 10 minutes ago, and I don't know if I'll answer as many questions as you have. I just don't, as long as people don't barge in and say you're taking our time. But feel free to leave if you want to.
I was wondering, what is the main method by which Community of Christ helps to fulfill the mission of Jesus Christ? Is it through missionary activity?
Missionary activity. A big part of it is the temple. The temple was established for the pursuit of peace in the world. So there are a lot of programs. We're in 50 different countries in the world. So there's been a lot of missionary work that way. We went into a tribal community in India who practiced polygamy, and within a generation, there was no more polygamy. I mean, sociologists study what happened because they've never seen that before. So, I mean, you know, there's some neat things that go on here. The apostle who baptized some of these polygamous people in India, the church was not happy with him. He said, this is what the Spirit of God led me to do. And it transformed that whole community. But it was hard to face that in lieu of our history and what we've been accused of all these years. You know. So, yeah. Thank you very much for listening.